powers must act together, because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
Somewhere Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
चुन चुन करके हिसाब लेना ये मेरी फितरत है.
Why should it be a problem if I'm smart enough to have multiple options? You should be admiring me.
भारत झुकने वाला भी नहीं.
The rise of India will be determined by India. It will be determined by our strength, not by the mistakes of others.
The old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy.
Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Now, India's Prime Minister Modi begins a 5-nation tour this week. In fact, as of making this video, he probably already is in UAE. But one stop immediately, that is UAE. This is very important, okay? Because this visit is not framed around like random symbolism or something. This is very important because the world is right now there is a global energy crisis going on, right? And according to the reports, Prime Minister Modi is expected to discuss long-term crude supplies, then liquefied natural gas deals, liquefied petroleum gas agreements, then India's strategic petroleum reserves and all that. So, in other words, this is not just a random diplomatic visit to sign some sort of free trade agreement or something. This is about fuel security. So if you look at the numbers, right, you'll find that India consumes roughly 5.5 million barrels per day of oil. Then around 85% of that crude is imported. And so this is a very huge problem, like because of all the Strait of Hormuz problems, right? Now, then another thing that just happened globally is that UAE has also just left OPEC. And under OPEC's restriction, its output was what? Its output was nearly 3.2 to 3.4 million barrels per day, around that range. But now Abu Dhabi is pushing towards 5 million barrels per day of production capacity by 2027. That's the goal. So ADNOC, the UAE's oil company, has even signaled that it will go beyond that if needed. So look at if you look at the equation, what do you see? India consumes 5.5 million barrels per day. UAE wants to produce 5 million barrels per day. Think about it, okay? UAE wants to produce 5 million barrels per day. Prime Minister Modi is going to Abu Dhabi right after UAE breaks out of OPEC quota system, right? So this cannot be treated as a normal state visit. In fact, when I made another video about this whole thing, then I had actually predicted that Prime Minister Modi will very soon, it's highly likely that he's going to make a visit to UAE. Okay? Because the way I'm looking at it is that all this is pre-planned. All right? So, but why am I talking about this? I'm not here making this video to talk about the data and numbers and all that, just to throw all that random things to you. See, what I'm talking about is it becomes very important and much bigger, okay, when you look at it from a different angle, that India is not trying to import all of the UAE's oil. If that is the case, then because that will be too simplistic, right? But I think that India's plan is far more strategic. Now, if you look at the crude oil prices globally, what's happening? Crude prices nowadays, they're not just shaped by supply and demand. There are other factors at play right now, right? They're shaped by dollar weakness. Dollar is devaluing and dollar is becoming weak. Then global inflation. Then war risk insurance has gone up, right? And just recently, Keir Starmer, the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, he also announced that the crude oil prices are not coming down anytime soon, which we'll talk about later on in the video, okay? then shipping choke points, then rising cost of moving oil through dangerous waters, of course. So what if India's real goal is not just cheaper oil? What if India, UAE, and Russia are quietly building a new oil architecture where India gets the discounted Russian crude, flexible UAE crude, or maybe it could be discounted UAE crude too, because for UAE, the break-even cost is very low. So even if UAE sells in crude at $60 per barrel to India, it is still UAE is still making profit off of it. You have to understand this game here, okay? But what is UAE's benefit out of it? UAE's benefit out of it is that it is getting a permanent market in the form of India. That's the beauty of it. Okay, India and UAE relations are so close that Prime Minister Modi calls UAE's president his brother, MBZ. He calls MBZ his brother. That matters. Okay, you have to understand this. In the geopolitics, calling when one leader calls another leader of another country brother, that's a whole different ball game. Okay, so India and UAE, so Russia will give cheap crude, UAE gives the cheap crude or flexible crude, you can say. Then strategic reserve support, right? Right now, UAE provides almost 5.5 million barrels per day of strategic reserve. 5.5 million barrels of strategic reserve. They are going to increase it further to 6 million barrels of strategic reserve. Okay, so and all that will be through alternate routing through Fujairah. Okay, so while Indian refineries, what they do is that when they get the cheap crude, they will take the cheap crude, refine it and all that into a higher value fuel for the global market, and they're going to sell the refined crude product to the global market. And here's the most interesting part in this whole thing. What if United States is not fully against this? In fact, US also realized that they cannot control the dollar devaluation. They cannot control the global inflation because the US wants global inflation and dollar devaluation right now to stabilize its economy. So, but so US definitely though wants lower oil prices though, right? How do you do that? Only way you do it is when you are accomplice in this whole thing. The one thing that I talked about. Why? Because if global oil prices explode, the entire Western economy gets hit. Look at what's happening in Europe. Inflation will further rise. It may lead to, in certain countries, it may lead to hyperinflation. Then interest rate may stay higher. Political pressure will rise, right? So even US may quietly prefer more UAE supply actually. Why? Because if you look at it, when UAE said that they are leaving, when the UAE announced it, President Trump's reaction was what? He said that, yeah, actually they are doing the right thing. Think about it. Okay, so all these things are happening. And Reliance, India's largest refining company, has also set up its base in United States too. So the real question is not whether Prime Minister Modi is visiting UAE and doing all that, right? The real question is this: are we watching India position itself as at the center of new oil trade system that is built around Russian crude discounts and UAE crude discounts, and India's refining power and American inflation management? Right? Because if this is true, then Prime Minister Modi's UAE visit is not just about energy security. It may be, I would say that it may be the start of a much larger shift, as in that's how the world or India and all these countries are actually working towards managing this global crisis that's coming our way. Okay, so guys, if you like these type of videos, if you like the global shift videos, if you like the emerging world order videos, please do like and subscribe, and let's get into the rest of the video. Okay, let's go and let's get going. So we just learned that UAE already is expanding the capacity towards 5 million barrels per day, which is far beyond actually the strict OPEC rules. OPEC basically says that, hey, do it 3 million barrels per day, like that. Now, since UAE is doing all that, so the question really is that if UAE wants to produce more oil outside the OPEC, so who is going to buy it? Now, you don't just go and leave an organization like that without knowing your customers beforehand, without knowing your market beforehand. Right? It's like getting into manufacturing and producing the products, but you don't have any buyer, any customer, or anything. Right? So clearly, UAE already knows who is the buyer, and uh, and the mechanism also. UAE also knows the mechanism. UAE probably already knows the pricing and all that too. It's just not in public yet. Now, talking about the customers and the pricing and all that, look at what already happened with Russia. Before 2022, Europe imported what, roughly 2.5 to 3 million uh, barrels per day of Russian crude, around that. And after sanctions, lots of people, lots of countries, they expected Russia to collapse, economy to collapse, the good stuff, right? And Russian oil exports to collapse. Why? Because of sanctions, nobody is going to buy it. This was the assumption without any backup plan, that what if countries do buy Russian oil, then what will happen? Or worst case scenario, that oil may be there. I mean, you can apply the sanction, you can block the thing, you can remove the customers, but oil will find its way. So sanctions didn't do anything to Russia. Russia still export 5 million barrels per day of crude and plus 2 to 3 million barrels per day of refined products. So Russia sells the refined crude products and the crude. Okay, so total 5, 7 to 8 million barrels per day still flowing globally after sanctions. Okay, and like I said, all this, it doesn't matter what you do with the market, doesn't matter what you do with the sanctions and all that. Energy, especially the oil based energy, the crude oil, it will find its way. Okay, so what happened? India ramped up the purchase. India alone increased Russian oil import from almost nothing, it was very less actually, to 1.8 to 2.2 million barrels per day, which was like 35 to 40% of India's total crude import. India's total crude import varies from 4.5 to 5 million barrels per day. And if you're purchasing 2.2 to 2.5 like that, that's like 50%. And what Russians did, Russians provided the discount, like $15 to $30 below the Brent prices. This is the latest one they're giving because of the price hikes by Brent, right? So that's what the Russians said, that okay, we will give it to you this fine. So think about it. Think about this whole thing strategically. Where am I getting at? Right? So strategically, if Russians can secure massive buyers through discounted crude, don't you think that UAE will do that the same thing? UAE isn't thinking the same way. Especially when UAE knows that they have the purchasers, the buyers, like India or China, because these two countries are the most hit. And especially when the future oil market does not depend on Europe anymore. Europe is not the oil market anymore. It is Asia. Asia has the most oil demand. China consumes 15 million barrels per day. India consumes 5.5 million barrels per day, which is like 20 million barrels per day of demand. Out of that, Russians produce 7 to 8 million barrels per day. And it's still, that's not even 50%. Think about it. 7 to 8 million barrels per day, and it's still 12 million barrels is gone. It's not there to meet the demand. Okay. Which means that UAE will produce 5 million barrels. So that's 13 million barrels, right? It's still 7 million barrels are not there. Like, who is going to sell that? Let's say Venezuelan crude, Brazilian crude, and all that. So they account for something. So now you see what I'm talking about, that UAE is already seeing that, oh, if I produce 5 million barrels per day, all my oil is going to be consumed right away, and we will have a long-term customer. And this is where the oil market actually is changing. Because country, if you look into it, the countries do not run on the crude. Countries run on diesel, petrol, jet fuel, petrochemicals, and all that, right? So now think about it this way, that if India can sell the refined fuel at prices less or close to crude prices itself, right? Let's say India buys crude at 55. Okay, India buys crude at 55, and India sells the refined crude product overall sale at 75. Even though diesel, petrol, jet fuel, petrochemicals, they're pricing, each and every one is priced differently, but the overall net pricing comes down to 75, or all that. That's what I'm talking about here. Okay, so 75 or 80. Why would any country buy the crude then? Don't you think that they will just simply go with the refined crude products? And that is the real shift that I'm talking about here. No countries that don't have refineries, they're not going to set up their own refinery. Countries that are crude producing countries, they are not even going to set up refineries if they don't have the refineries. Okay, simply because it is cheaper for them to buy the refined crude product. It's economical. Now, why this thing that I'm saying is going to hold, and this is the shift where the energy market is moving. It's because, see, first thing is that dollar in devaluation. Okay, dollar is devaluing. So regardless of what you do, there will be inflation. Okay, so inflation is gonna keep the oil prices high no matter what you do. So if the and what is that, oil prices will be high? Crude will be at higher prices. And that's number one thing. Number two thing is that uh, Britain just announced that the crude oil prices are not going to come down soon, anytime soon, even after the Iran war. Why is that? It's because the institutions like Lloyd of London, which are the global insurers, they will eventually what? They will eventually want to recover the losses through higher shipping and risk pricing. Right? If they will have to make up for the loss, the money that they are paying to all these shipping containers, these companies. Right? So that's another reason why the crude prices will be high. And if crude prices are high, think about it. If crude prices are high only because these pricing systems, the pricing bodies, the companies, they are keeping it high. You have to understand this. So if you get out of that system, let's say if UAE is not following OPEC, and if UAE gets out of there, then UAE can set up its own pricing model too, that hey, I'm going to sell it at this price. All UAE needs is a customer. Lots of countries that were part of OPEC, like Ecuador or few other countries who left OPEC, some of them actually left with this intent that they're going to sell their own crude and all that, but it didn't work for them because they were lesser known countries. But UAE is a whole different ball game, right? So that's another reasoning, that since crude prices are going to stay higher for a long time, so it's best to refine and sell it at a cheaper rate. Just like Russians are doing, UAE will do it too. So also what India is doing already, India has already positioned itself exactly for this market. India already has over 5 million barrels per day refining capacity. Now, mega refineries, there are like Jamnagar and all that, they can roughly do 1.2 million barrels per day. And India actually, uh, uh, what you call is, India did a sale of almost was $65 billion worth of refined petroleum product export. So India is also diversifying its crude imports too. Russia, UAE, and they both, India does both in the national currencies. All right. So and then now Brazil has also ramped up its production. So India is actually uh, importing it from Brazil as well. So otherwise, normally in this type of scenarios, like for example during the COVID time frame, India actually was importing it from Nigeria. Nigeria was India's fourth largest exporter during the COVID time. But right now, I'm not hearing much from Nigerian side. Okay, which means that, and Nigeria is part of OPEC. So India, it seems like, is totally avoiding buying anything from OPEC, to be honest. Okay, so that tells you something, right? That India is what? It's not really following the OPEC. India is not. India is working around this whole OPEC or cartel structure type thing or any pricing model. Because after Russians gave India the cheaper oil, they realized that yes. Now another thing is happening too. If you notice that India is setting up its refinery in Brownsville, Texas. Now, Brownsville, Texas, if we go check the map, that area, that region is specifically is meant for take the oil, take the crude, refine it, and export it. Which means that tells me this too. That tells me that they're going to take that oil and export from there as well. And if US has to ship the crude to India, it's gonna cost more. But if refineries are set up in US itself, then they are gonna buy a cheaper crude and then start to provide the refined crude. What does that do? What it does is that US starts to sell its crude or supply the crude internally and nobody's going to say anything. Now, if US wants to stabilize its own oil market, then what US will do? US will simply get out of the export system. Think about it. And US entered this whole global oil market, the export system, in 2015. All right. So understand the mechanics, what's going on here. Okay. This is very important. Now, so when you are part of that export mechanism, export market, then you have to follow the international standards, international pricing standard. You have to follow that. This is why oil prices in US are very high too. That's because US simply imports from Canada. Even though US imports from Canada, none of the US oil comes from Middle East. So why prices are high in US? It's because that when you're part of this whole export international system, then you have to follow that is international standard of pricing, right? Now, coming back to the point again, what's going to happen is that with refineries set up locally, and if this mechanism works, then what US will do is that US will get out of the whole export thing, the oil export business. And what they're going to do is that India, they will start to ask Reliance refineries, lots of Indian refineries and all, to set up the refineries in US and expand the capacity and export the refined crude product. Why? Because locally they don't have to worry about uh, if it's happening within the US land. So technically that's not export. So So what you're doing, you are actually stabilizing your market, and at the same time you are exporting the refined crude product rather than the refined crude oil. So this is the whole entire mechanism. I mean, anyway, so this was my whole purpose to explain you what exactly is going on. And for UAE to get out of all the OPEC and all that, this is the only reason. Why? Because if you look into it, UAE's 70% of UAE's economy is through non-oil related exports and all that. So this gives UAE flexibility. It can prioritize market share, it can prioritize Asian integration, it can prioritize production expansion, it can prioritize long-term trade positioning and all that. So it can do all those things. Okay, so that's why for UAE it only makes sense to leave. Okay, because like I said, like I explained, like, because over time US will pull out, and they all are gonna start getting into refined crude product. That's how things are gonna play out. So the main players will be the countries that will refine the product, and that actually will make more sense for US to do too. Why? Because US has to get out of the whole security business and all that. Getting out of security business meaning that they're just supplying the crude, and then refiners are going to just supply it here and there, and they're good to go. And nobody has to worry about crude oil pricing and all that. So this is why the countries are gonna, you will see more and more countries are going to scramble to provide a cheaper crude to countries like India and China, so that it can be refined, and whatever happens after that. Okay, so this is how the whole world order is going to change. This is how the whole oil market is going to change. At least that's what my understanding is. So this is it for this video, guys. If you like the video, please do like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys in another video. Take care.